Dan, thank you so much for joining us here in the studio. Great to have you here at Super Return Energy and Infrastructure Asia. Tell me what key topics and what the hottest conversations are in this space, in this geography at the moment.
Yeah, no, first and foremost, thanks for having me, and it's great to be here. I think one of the hottest topics in Asia Pac is certainly energy transition, decarbonization. Not so different from the rest of the world. If we think about energy transition, we play by a principle. We have to go where the emissions are. We have to address it up front if we want to be able to get to net zero on a timely basis or an urgent basis. And we see where those emissions are coming from globally. More than 50% are actually coming from Asia Pacific. So I think that one plays the scale of the opportunity here. And also, we need to prioritize this region when it comes to addressing climate change and some of the risks that are rising out of that.
So when we're talking about addressing climate change, it's the whole ecosystem of energy transition in lots of different parts. And we heard your panel talking about that today, that it's a complex picture of how it all slots together. It's not just a matter of we've got to not use oil and gas, is it?
Yes.
We've got to provide the entire infrastructure around this. Just describe that for me and what the investment opportunities are because of that.
I would say it's a generational investment of unprecedented scale. You're absolutely right. It's not just about supply chain or supply decarbonization when we think about energy or power generation. And when we talk about those, you were thinking about the wind, the solar plants, and the battery storage assets, but also the ancillary infrastructure that needs to be built out to support the continued build out of those technologies at scale, for example, the grid. And then we are talking about demand side decarbonization as well when it comes to energy efficiency, whether it's providing behind the meter solutions to some of these corporates and governments around the world that have these mandates to get to net zero. And then from our perspective, we would say energy transition is a very broad topic. It's not only covered under our renewable power business. We've got our neighboring friends internally in other verticals of business such as infrastructure and private equity, who also play the transition angle in different types of businesses that we have the subject experts to invest in and operate them in. I'll give you an example. Our infrastructure business invests in the grid. We own one of the largest grid networks in Australia, in Victoria, called AusNet. And one of the core thesis of putting capital into that business was because we saw Australia and the world is going to head to that energy transition and net zero pathway. And we see a humongous amount of opportunity to deploy capital at good risk-adjusted returns to continue to build out the grid that will facilitate that. But then on the renewable side, we focus on the wind, the solar, the batteries. What we also do is helping corporates decarbonize their businesses and help reduce their emissions. And we don't exercise discretion on which business. We're very pragmatic. It can be any company across any part of the economy. It can be a medical services company. It can be a technology company. It can be a manufacturing business. As long as we can provide a capital and operating capabilities in decarbonization technology that help them transform their business model in a way that is Paris aligned in their emissions profile, that is an opportunity that we can look at.
You talked about Asia being one of the biggest emitters, and that's the figures are there. How motivated is this region to change that and to move forward? And what are the barriers that are still in place to create that situation?
Yeah, maybe on the appetite to advance on energy transition, getting to net zero in Asia Pac, we're seeing increasing momentum, and it's not, and this really is driven by fundamentals of decarbonization technologies, and in particular renewables, because when we look at some of the most actionable and impactful way, the lowest hanging fruits will address a huge amount of emissions today, and the world is increasingly electrified. It's the wind and solar and the battery technologies, because they are the most cost competitive forms of bulk electricity production today. And so people are investing in these types of technologies to decarbonize because they're cheap and it's a commercial decision to procure power in these forms. The decarbonization benefits are certainly very, very additive and helpful. It's the icing on the top. And then you have certain governments that are providing policy to continue to support the deployment of decarbonization technology. That certainly is helpful as well. But what really is at the crux is the fundamentals, is the commercial decision to actually deploy these assets. And the way that we like to really describe at a macro level is decarbonization of renewables is no longer driven by a policy push where you rely on incentives or subsidies. It's much more of a corporate pull today. And yes, for sure, we're not trying to downplay the importance of policies, but these are just the ebbs and flows of a very long-term uprising trend.
It's not just good for the planet, it is good for the bottom line, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
And you talked there about sort of more government interest and government pushes as well. Do you think, obviously, energy security has become so much more of an issue in the last few years with what we've seen geopolitically in the world? Do you think that's been part of that momentum as you described it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail in the head. And when we talk about national security, and I was just on a panel at Super Return where we talked about energy security as part of national security. I think the most recent and biggest example of that is the poster child and a bit of a wake-up call for sovereigns and countries globally is the war that we're seeing happening in Europe. And, what we saw as investors and asset managers in the renewable decarbonization space is, yes, there was a near-term kind of uptick in fossil fuels when Russia first invaded Ukraine because everybody was just scrambling to try to secure energy. People need the power to heat up their homes and to get through winter and also the summer to cool. But it only highlighted and make stronger the value proposition of renewables because there's no input feedstock. The renewables with batteries, they produce and provide electricity when there's wind and when there's sun. And when you have storage, you have much more controllability and flexibility on the dispatch. You don't need to rely on gas flows from an external third party or another sovereign or a country. And that creates resiliency in the energy supply chain. And renewables is additive to that. And has played a big role and is another one of the key drivers for adoptions today.
Another key factor that's being talked about a lot at this event is obviously the proliferation of AI and the impact that's having in terms of the building of data centers. And I think your panel discussed that and how there's going to be a huge need there, a huge opportunity, and also for those investable assets that surround all of that.
Yeah. No, it's, look, we want to say we have the foresight to see this coming, but certainly not at the scale that we're seeing today. And I don't think we have seen anything like the proliferation of digitalization infrastructure and most recently AI that really was kicked off by ChatGPT. And the reason for that is when we think about some of the hyperscaler technology companies, the data centers and the cloud services that they provide is mission critical in the digital world today. And the biggest bottleneck to scaling those up is not land, it's not equipment, it's access to power. And not any power is access to the most cost competitive power. Green, because they have their own decarbonization objectives, companies such as Microsoft and Google. And the adoption and proliferation of AI and that's supported by data centers has resulted really in a transformative step change in the amount of power demand that's required around the world. And we're seeing through both our renewable business because we deal with a lot of these customers that are looking for this power, but also our infrastructure business where we have one of the largest data center developers and operators around the world. So we're providing these data centers to some of these hyperscalers and the renewable power almost as a package solution. So having that front row seat, you're absolutely right. I would say in the last 24 months is another driver that has continued to drive momentum in this space.
You talk about the last 24 months, there has been a sort of a reduced M&A kind of landscape, but that, from what you're saying, you don't think that's necessarily reflected in this specific sector?
No, and I would say a lot of the M&A is good. We're very active in M&A from Brookfield's perspective in the region and globally. But M&A also goes through cycles, just like the economy. And if you look at our renewable power and transition business today, we have around 270 gigawatts and growing of development pipeline. And so when the environment is not conducive to a lot of M&A deals, what we focus on, and we have an alternative path to continuing to deploy capital and grow, is to focus on our development pipeline. And that really leverages the full life cycle capabilities of our business. And we're not just a financial investor, we're very much owner operator and take on hands-on approach. And we get to put our site identification, permitting, procurement, construction, contracting, financing, operational and asset management capabilities to work. And that helps us to stay busy during periods of slow activity. And a lot of the value is created organically, and we earn much more outsized, attractive risk-adjusted returns from that.
There's always lots of work to be done, so we really appreciate you spending your time in our studio with us. Thank you so much for joining me.
No,
Great
thanks
to talk to you, Daniel.
Thank you, and thanks for having me and taking the time.
Great.
I really appreciate it.